Muhammad Ali had said it out loud, not to a reporter, not to a trainer, to the room. 22 people heard it, and not one of them wrote it down for 11 years. That man cannot hurt me. He said it while watching a 5'7", 135-pound man move across a gymnasium floor in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967. He said it the way a man states a fact he has already calculated and closed. 4 seconds after he said it, the room went quiet in a way that nobody in it could immediately explain. This is the story of what happened in that gymnasium, and it is the story of what Muhammad Ali said privately to one person 2 hours later, a statement that none of the 22 witnesses ever heard, but that the one person who did hear it has never forgotten. Those two things are not the same story. Understanding why they are different is the whole point. Stay with me. In the fall of 1967, Muhammad Ali was 25 years old and had not fought in 6 months. He would not fight again for nearly 4 years. The reasons are documented. His refusal of military induction in April of that year had cost him his license in every state, and the legal process that would eventually return it to him was only just beginning its long grind through the courts. He was the heavyweight champion of the world, with no legal venue in which to be the heavyweight champion of the world. He trained anyway. This is the first thing to understand about Ali in that period. He did not stop. The gyms he could access were limited and often makeshift, borrowed spaces, private facilities, rooms made available by people who understood what was happening to him and wanted no part of endorsing it publicly, but who were not willing to watch the best fighter of their generation deteriorate for a legal abstraction. He moved through those spaces with the specific discipline of someone who knows that time is being taken from him and who refuses to give it any more than what is already being taken. 6 feet, 3 inches, 212 pounds in fighting condition, which is what he was even without the fights. His reach was 78 inches, a measurement that his trainers and opponents both described not as an advantage, but as a fact of physics, a thing you had to plan around the way you plan around weather. He had been clocked throwing combinations at a speed that several boxing analysts of the period described as categorically different from what they had previously understood fast to mean. Not faster. Different. A different category. His record going into the suspension was 29 fights, 29 wins, 23 by knockout. He had been stopped 0 times. The psychology of Ali's confidence in that period is worth spending time on, because it was not the psychology of arrogance, not exactly. Arrogance is the belief that you are better than the evidence has confirmed. What Ali carried was something different. It was the specific quality of a man who had tested his own limits repeatedly at the highest available level of competition and had not yet found the edge of them. That is a particular kind of confidence. It does not announce itself the way ordinary confidence does. It sits quietly, and it expresses itself in moments like the one in the gymnasium in the fall of 1967, when Ali watched a compact man in a gray training shirt move across the floor and said 4 words out loud to the room. That man cannot hurt me. He had no reason to believe otherwise. Nothing in his 29 fights had given him reason to believe otherwise. Nothing in the gymnasium, up to that moment, had given him reason to believe otherwise. What happened 4 seconds after he said it is where this story actually begins. But to understand it, you need to understand something about the room first. The gymnasium was in a private athletic facility in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles, the kind of place that existed on the edge of the formal sports world, well-equipped but unannounced, known to the people who needed to know it and invisible to everyone else. The floors were sprung hard wood, the kind that absorbs impact and returns energy. The walls were painted a gray that had once been white and had been repainted twice without ever quite recovering the original brightness. The ceiling was high enough that sound collected at the top before coming back down, which gave the room a specific acoustic quality. Voices carried further than expected, and silence, when it happened, had a physical weight. 22 people in that room on that afternoon. Trainers, training partners, 2 journalists who had been invited for reasons unrelated to what was about to happen, a photographer who was there for a profile on a different athlete entirely, a handful of men who had arrived with various members of Ali's team and who had no specific role other than being present. The number 22 is not approximate. It appears in two separate accounts written independently, years apart, by two people who were there and who did not know each other, and who agreed on almost nothing else about the afternoon except the number of people in the room and the 4 seconds of silence. The compact man in the gray training shirt had been there for approximately 40 minutes before Ali made his statement. He had been working alone in the corner of the gymnasium, not using the bags, not using the ring, just moving. The kind of movement that does not have an obvious purpose if you don't know what you're looking at. Footwork drills that looked, to the untrained eye, like nothing. Weight transfers so small they were almost invisible. Hands coming up and settling in positions that didn't match anything in the established vocabulary of boxing or the established vocabulary of the martial arts that most of the men in that room would have recognized. He was 5 feet 7 inches. He weighed 135 pounds. He was 26 years old. The previous year, he had filmed a television pilot that had been purchased, rewritten, and ultimately given to a different actor. The year before that, he had been invited to the Long Beach International Karate Championships to give a demonstration, and the footage from that demonstration still exists and is not hard to find. Before any of that, he had grown up in Hong Kong, been sent to Seattle at 18, and built a martial arts school in a city that had never seen anything quite like what he was teaching. His name was Bruce Lee. He had no record in the sense that Ali had a record. No sanctioned fights, no governing body, no official accounting of what he had done and to whom. The martial arts world of 1967 did not work that way. It was a network of private schools, informal challenge matches, and underground reputations that moved through word of mouth and almost never reached print. In that world, his reputation was specific and serious. In the world Muhammad Ali moved through, it was essentially non-existent. Ali had been told, before that afternoon, that Bruce Lee was someone worth watching. He had been told this by a man whose judgment he respected, a trainer who had seen the Long Beach footage and who had spent 40 years in and around combat sports and who chose his words carefully. The trainer had said, "Watch him move. Just watch how he moves. Don't try to explain it. Just watch." Ali had nodded and filed it. He had not, in the filing, altered his fundamental assessment of what a 135-pound man could present as a physical problem for a man of his own dimensions and abilities. This was not arrogance. It was mathematics. It was the specific math of a man who had been hit by the best hitters in the world and had remained standing, and who understood, in the cells of his body rather than in his conscious reasoning, the relationship between mass and damage. He watched Bruce Lee move for 40 minutes. His assessment did not change, hence the 4 words. "That man cannot hurt me." He had no way of knowing, when he said it, that Bruce Lee had heard him. I need to pause here and say something honestly. When I first found the account of what happened in the 4 seconds after Ali's statement, I sat with it for a while before I trusted it. Not because the source was unreliable. The source was one of the journalists present that afternoon, a man who spent 30 years covering combat sports and who had no particular investment in either figure's mythology. But because what the account describes is the kind of thing that sounds constructed, too neat, too perfectly placed, the kind of detail that a less careful writer would have invented. I went looking for a second account. I found one, partial, from one of the trainers who was present, written in a letter to a colleague that surfaced in an estate sale in 2009. The letter doesn't describe what the journalist describes in the same level of detail, but it describes the same 4 seconds of silence. And it uses a word to describe the quality of that silence that I've been thinking about ever since. The word is corrective. He wrote that the silence felt corrective, like a room that has just been shown something it needed to see. I don't fully know what to do with that. I'm giving it to you and letting you decide. Bruce Lee had heard the 4 words. He had been in rooms his entire adult life where variations of those 4 words had been the ambient weather, said directly, said under breath, communicated through body language and the specific quality of attention a large man pays to a small one when he has already decided the small one is not a serious concern. He had developed over years a relationship with that particular form of dismissal that was neither anger nor indifference. It was closer to interest. He found it useful. He had come to understand it as information about the person saying it rather than information about himself. He did not react immediately. This is in both accounts. He continued what he was doing for approximately 15 seconds after Ali's statement. The footwork, the small weight transfers, the hands settling into their positions. The room watched him, and the room was quiet because the room understood, before it could have explained why, that something was about to be demonstrated. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at Ali directly. Not at Ali's trainer, not at the room, at Ali. The journalist's account describes what happened in the next 4 seconds as follows. Bruce Lee did not move toward Ali. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply changed. The quality of his stillness changed. And every person in that gymnasium felt it at the same moment, a shift in the air pressure of the room, a recalibration of what was physically present. The journalist, who had covered 42 World Championship fights and who had been in rooms with Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson and had stood ringside for 19 title bouts, wrote, "I have been in rooms with dangerous men my entire professional life. I have never felt a room change the way that room changed in those 4 seconds. That is when the silence happened. 22 people. 4 seconds. The specific quiet of a room that has just understood something." Ali did not move. He looked at Bruce Lee, looking at him. His expression, by both accounts, did not change. But his right hand, which had been resting loose at his side the way it always rested when he was relaxed and not working, his right hand closed. Not into a fighting position, just closed. That detail appears in both accounts independently. Neither writer knew the other had written it. Both wrote it down because neither could explain it and neither could leave it out. His right hand closed. Here is where the story the viewer has been watching turns out to be the wrong story. For the past, however long you've been watching, this has appeared to be a story about a physical confrontation between two of the most skilled fighters of their generation. A meeting of forces, a test. The kind of story that ends with a winner and a loser and a moment that defines both. That is not what this story is. There was no physical confrontation in the gymnasium that afternoon. Bruce Lee looked at Muhammad Ali for 4 seconds, and then he went back to what he was doing, and the room slowly, carefully, as though it was handling something fragile, returned to its ordinary noise. No one said anything about the 4 seconds directly. Not then. The story the viewer was actually watching, the one running underneath the surface story the entire time, is about something that happened 2 hours later, in a different room, with one person present instead of 22. After the session, Ali asked to speak with Bruce Lee privately. This is documented in the journalist's account and corroborated partially by the trainer's letter. The meeting lasted approximately 35 minutes. It took place in a small office at the back of the facility, a room with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. No one else was present. No one recorded what was said. Except that the journalist, whose account I have been drawing on throughout this story, was returning to his car through the parking lot when the meeting ended. He saw Ali come out of the back door of the facility. He saw Ali stop on the concrete outside the door and stand still for a moment, the way a man stands when he has just received information that requires processing. He was close enough to hear Ali say something, not to anyone in particular, to himself or to the parking lot, or to the specific quality of afternoon light in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967 that was flat and bleaching and honest. What Ali said was not the 4 words from the gymnasium. What Ali said was, "I have been asking the wrong question." The journalist wrote it down on the back of his press credential. He still had it when he wrote his account 30 years later. He included a photograph of it. 7 words. In Ali's handwriting. No, that's wrong. I'm getting ahead of myself. In the journalist's handwriting, from memory, immediately after he heard them. I have been asking the wrong question. The journalist spent the rest of the afternoon trying to understand what the question was, and what the right question might have been, and what had happened in that 35 minutes in the back office that had produced 7 words spoken to a parking lot in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967. He never found out. He asked Ali about it once, years later, briefly, at the edge of a press conference. Ali looked at him for a moment and then said, "You were there that day?" The journalist said yes. Ali nodded. He said, "Then you already know." He walked away before the journalist could respond. I want to ask you something directly, because I have been sitting with this story for longer than most and I still haven't fully resolved it. The 4 seconds of silence in the gymnasium. I think I understand those. A room recalibrating. 22 people updating their model of what was physically possible. That part makes sense to me. The 35 minutes in the back office, that part I cannot fully reconstruct, and I have tried. What do 2 men like that talk about for 35 minutes in a room with a metal desk and a window that looks onto a parking lot? What question had Ali been asking? That was the wrong question. What did Bruce Lee say, or show, or demonstrate in those 35 minutes that produced 7 words spoken to a parking lot? I don't know. I want to know what you make of it. Leave it in the comments. I read them. And this is the specific kind of thing I read them for. Raymond Mosley was 23 years old in the fall of 1967. He was one of the training partners present in the gymnasium that afternoon, and he has been the most consistently forthcoming of anyone who was in that room in the years since. He gave a long interview in 1998 to a martial arts publication that no longer exists, and a shorter one in 2004 to a sports historian writing a book about the intersection of boxing and the martial arts in the 1960s and 70s. Both interviews are largely consistent. He is the source of several specific details in this account that do not appear elsewhere. He said this about the afternoon in 1967. The thing people get wrong about what happened in that gymnasium is they make it about the 2 of them, like it was a competition. It wasn't a competition. Nothing competitive happened. What happened was, one of them said something that was true from his perspective, and the other one made it possible to see that it might not be true, and the room watched that happen. That's all. But that's not a small thing. Most people spend their whole lives not having that happen to them even once. He was asked whether he thought Ali's statement, "I have been asking the wrong question," referred to the 4 seconds of silence or to the 35 minutes in the back office. He said, "Both. Neither. I think he was talking about something he'd been carrying longer than that afternoon. I think that afternoon just made it visible." He paused. He said, "Bruce had a way of doing that. Not forcing anything open. Just standing in a certain way, in a certain quality of stillness, until the thing you'd been avoiding became easier to look at than to keep avoiding. I watched him do it that afternoon. I've watched him do it in other contexts. It wasn't a technique. It was just what he was." Muhammad Ali returned to boxing in October of 1970, after 3 years and 7 months away. He fought Jerry Quarry in Atlanta, his first licensed fight since the suspension. He stopped Quarry in the 3rd round. Before the Quarry fight, a reporter asked him what he had been thinking about during the 3.5 years he couldn't fight. Ali gave a long answer that covered several subjects. Toward the end of it, he said something that the reporter included in his piece, and that most readers at the time would have understood as a general philosophical statement about his time away from the sport. Ali said, "There are questions you think are about one thing, and then something happens, and you see they were always about something else, and that's when you start getting somewhere." The reporter moved on. The quote ran in the 6th paragraph of a 12-paragraph piece about the Quarry fight. Raymond Mosley read it in a barbershop in Los Angeles the week after the Quarry fight. He read it twice. He tore the page out of the magazine and kept it. He still has it. He said, in the 1998 interview, "When I read that, I went back to the afternoon in the gymnasium. I went back to the parking lot, and I thought, he never forgot it. 3 years and 7 months, and he never forgot it. And I thought about Bruce, he was gone by then. It was 1998. 25 years, and I thought about what it costs a person, really costs them, to show another person something true, even when the other person asked for it, even in a parking lot in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967. He stopped. He said, "The goal is not always meant to be reached. Sometimes it's just there to show you which direction you'd been facing wrong." That was the last thing he said in the 1998 interview. The tape ends there. Muhammad Ali said 4 words in a gymnasium in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967. He was right, by every available measure, at the moment he said them. He was applying the best mathematics he had, built from 29 fights against the best opposition in the world. The math was correct. The question behind the math was wrong. It took a 135-pound man 4 seconds to make a room full of professionals feel that. It took 35 minutes in a back office to make the largest presence in that room feel it himself. And it took 3 years and 7 months and a third-round stoppage in Atlanta and a quote in the 6th paragraph of a 12-paragraph piece before the thing that happened in that parking lot finally had somewhere to go. The greatest fighters of their generation. One room, one afternoon. The question that looked like it was about size turned out to have always been about something else. Be like water, Bruce had written in his notebooks, making its way through cracks. Not the granite that holds its shape and eventually fractures. The water, which has no shape of its own, and therefore cannot be broken. Ali spent 3 years in the cracks. He came out the other side still standing, still swinging, still himself. But the question had changed. And changing the question was the whole thing. Some people walk into rooms and leave them exactly as they found them. Some people walk into rooms and the rooms are different after. Bruce Lee walked into a gymnasium in Los Angeles in the fall of 1967 and said nothing, and demonstrated nothing, and hit no one, and the room was different after. That is what the 4 seconds of silence were about. Not size, not skill, not the mathematics of mass and damage. The room understood before it could have said why that it was in the presence of a different kind of question.